All right, welcome to another episode of the Political Playbook. I'm Wyatt, and this is my co-host Darren. So we're gonna go ahead and kick it right off for you. So we've got to start here, and Darren. So the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in favor of the Trump administration, and they did not rule on the constitutionality of the ending of birthright citizenship, which was the whole executive order. They actually just ruled on the constitutionality of nationwide injunctions, which they ultimately ruled were unconstitutional. So, did I miss anything there? Do you want to go ahead and give your take? Like, what do you think of this? This is nuts to me, frankly. This is absolutely nuts.
22 states and immigrant rights groups challenged the executive order. They said it violates the 14th Amendment. A bunch of federal district courts just issued nationwide injunctions to block it. But the Supreme Court ruled that federal judges likely exceed their authority by issuing nationwide injunctions like this. And so this ruling allows the executive order to take effect in a patchwork of states with I guess a delay of about 30 days. It'll take effect in about 30 days in the 28 states that did not challenge it. And like you said, the Supreme Court did not rule on the constitutionality of the executive order itself. And on the subject of the constitutionality of it, I did copy the 14th Amendment. I guess you would call it the citizenship clause. I'll read it off real quick. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. This was originally intended for slaves or the descendants of slaves, and when they were freed, this is kind of how they dealt with that issue. It granted them citizenship. This is kind of anomalous throughout the globe. It's more common in the Western Hemisphere where it's all like post-colonial powers or you know nations like that. So the laws are a bit different. But in the old world, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, typically to be a citizen, you have to be a descendant of another citizen. That's typically how citizenship is conferred. So, countries like ours, which just grant automatic birthright citizenship, are actually in the minority. I don't really interpret the Constitution. I mean, it's hard to interpret the Constitution any other way than what has been the precedent. Like it seems pretty explicit and straightforward, even if the intent was not for a million, you know, Central American illegals to come in and have birth and then their children become citizens. That was not explicitly laid out. So there's I guess there's
Gee, I
definitely
wonder
room for
why.
well, I think back then I don't think for one I don't think they could quite predict it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there was no radical introduction of immigrants in the 19th century. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that didn't happen.
Well, those were all
That's
like
not where the term melting
Italian.
pot comes from, right? That's not where that comes from. That's no, that's postmodern terminology. Yeah. That's
Oh,
y
okay, yeah, we're gonna act like Ben Franklin would be stoked to see a bunch of Italians coming
Ben
in.
Fr- Ben Franklin was not there for the passing of the 14th Amendment. All right? Like if
I know. I'm just thinking of what the founders. Yeah, I
no,
know.
this
It
is
was
what why? Under what circumstance? This is post founders,
well,
obviously, right?
yeah, it was 1866, so this
It's
is a long time.
constitutionally ratified. You know what I mean? Like you can't just ignore that. And the idea that this was meant solely for slaves is just ludicrous. They made this with immigrants in mind. They affirmed it like less than 30 years after they ratified the 14th Amendment. There was a Chinese American, and he sued the government for his citizenship, and the government made it very clear this applies to immigrants. How
Less
could it?
than 30
How could
years.
it
Oh,
not?
30 years is a long time. 30 years is a long time. I mean 1866, we're talking right after the Civil War.
Right. So you're talking less than a
So
generation.
that was what was on the mind at the time. So
Listen,
it's
I'm
obviously
not gonna
referring to that.
I'm not gonna deny the fact that this was mostly meant for the descendants of slaves to have citizenship. Okay. But it also there was a huge demographic of immigrants in this country in the North, right? Irish people. As a matter of fact, in the 1860s, there was like draft riots from Irish immigrants. Like the idea that immigrants weren't here and this didn't apply to them is just lunacy. It applied to the Chinese immigrants building the railroads. You know, their descendants were national or naturalized. I mean, this idea that this birthright citizenship only applied to slaves is just not true. As a matter of fact, it
Well, I
applies
didn't
to
say it
every
only
single
applied.
person. It applies to every single person.
I didn't say it only applied. I'm just saying look at the intent. I mean, look at the date. So it was obviously meant for descendants of slaves, and then there were the side effects. But obviously this, I mean, ultimately though, the intent doesn't really matter because we're in the situation we are now. How are we going to remedy it? I think we're headed in the right direction on this one. I think the idea that,
How?
somebody, well, people do like birth tourism, people will come from other countries and, expecting mothers like 8 months in, and they'll come over, they'll have a baby on the US, and then, they have an anchor baby, and then that baby has US citizenship, and, people have exploited the system. So I'm
I
all
mean, listen,
for
I
limiting.
don't deny that, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a constitutional amendment, Darren. It's just as unbreaking as the First Amendment, as the Second Amendment, as it's just as important as the rest of the Constitution. There's no amount of executive orders. The idea that you're going to executive order your way out of a constitutional amendment is crazy.
Well, look, obviously, like when I read it how it's been interpreted, right? I mean, it's really hard to interpret any other way. But here's the thing, though. Ultimately, if the Supreme Court interprets it another way, then that's all the power you need to change it,
And you're telling me that even this Supreme Court, as crazy as they are, they're gonna change the fact that it says all persons born or naturalized to, oh, actually all descendants of citizens. Like there is no reading around that. You know what I mean? And here's the thing, there's also no precedent for it either. So it's not like they're gonna be able to lean back on something and be like, actually this was the right decision. They'd have to have a whole new set of legal doctrine, which I'm not saying that they're opposed to that, but I'm just saying that you're essentially undoing an entire amendment to the Constitution. That you cannot create a higher barrier to be a constitutional amendment, right? And this got there. And the idea that it's just going to be overruled by an interpretation of six justices is nuts. That's why
Well,
they
look,
didn't rule on it, is because they knew that they can't rule for it.
yeah, there's no reading around it, honestly. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they could get away with it. I'd like to see them try, and that'd be that'd be interesting at the very least. I don't know that. I don't think six would sign on. I think maybe one or two. You know, I'm thinking like Clarence Thomas might. I'm iffy if any others. Maybe, yeah, really only him. I don't know. I
Well, here's
definitely
the
don't
thing.
think you.
Like that, so they chose not to rule on the constitutionality of the executive order, right? And they did that for a reason, like you and I are thinking. But that lawsuit is going to, I mean, the executive order is still going to be upheld for potentially several months. I mean, the only people that could put a pause on it now would be the Supreme Court. So I don't know what they're gonna do because this thing's going up to the Supreme Court. Like, there's no the lawsuits are gonna go. It may take a year, but who knows, right? But I'm just not comfortable really with the the president trying to override basically an entire amendment to the Constitution via executive order. Like that's insane.
I don't really mind it so much because it serves my interests, but
You're just skeptical on how much it'll work.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, when they rule on the real issue and not just the executive order issue, then I think likely they won't rule in his favor. I mean, these justices have proven they're not uh, in the cult. I mean, they'll rule against him. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's fair. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, I sort of agree. I mean they're still conservative, right? But they are not like undyingly loyal to Trump. That's the way it seems.
Yeah,
Um,
but we talked about okay. We talked about there's kind of two different things. We talked about the constitutionality of the real issue behind it, but let's kind of talk more about like the ability of these like district court judges to override an executive order. To me, that seems a little ludicrous because if any federal judge, you know, even these like really low ranking ones can just essentially overturn an executive order, then the executive really doesn't have that much power if he can just be if his agenda can just be upended like this. And this was actually a problem that Biden faced as well
oh,
during
absolutely.
his term. So it's certainly a bipartisan issue. I so in that sense, I'm all for this executive order. I would prefer a stronger executive and frankly, even when Biden was in power, I think it probably would have been to my advantage if more of his agenda was allowed. In those terms, I'm all for the executive order in both regards, but in this sense, I think they made the correct decision. I don't think the executive should be bogged down by these these district court judges.
Well, see, I'm totally against what Steve Bannon and these big academics call, unitary executive theory, right? I'm in huge opposition to that. All right, I think it's ludicrous that this idea that we have three co-equal branches of government, right? I mean, it's clearly explained, right? And we're gonna circumvent two-thirds of that to one person, not even the representatives, not even the interpreters of the law. We're gonna circumvent it into one person. Okay, that to me sounds ludicrous. That's a step towards autocracy, and I'm just not a fan typically. Now that being said, I don't want to override like a mandate. Like, for example, like Obama had a pretty clear mandate, right? So in terms of these specifically in terms of these nationwide injunctions, though, I do find it kind of silly the idea that like just a single district court can roadblock an entire agenda, right? For years, right? Because I mean, what's Trump's most like lethal weapon against him right now? It's time. He's a 4 year, or I guess now it's 3.5 years, right? And let's be
Oh
real
yeah,
here.
we're already in July tomorrow, so.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just call a spade here. I mean, this dude really only has 18 months of legislative presidency left. After the midterms, I'm sure he's going to lose at least the House. I mean, is he going to be able to pass anything? So it's pretty much just going to be whatever he can do by himself. So I think this idea that, one district court can just block everything. Now, I do have to concede, though, that that is the precedent, right? Despite how silly I find it, I still do consider it the precedent. I mean, you got to think this goes all the way back to DACA, right? Under Obama, it's usually meant to stop Democrats. Biden did, student debt relief. That was stopped by a nationwide injunction. Biden did vaccine mandates under OSHA. That was stopped by a nationwide injunction. He tried to eliminate Title 42, the border security one during COVID. That was stopped by a nationwide injunction. So, like, this idea is pretty, like, set in stone. And all of those got upheld by the Supreme Court as totally, like, sound legal doctrine. And then now they're like, oh, actually, the whole time it's been unconstitutional. I think that that's a little fucked up, but that's politics.
Oh yeah, I mean that's part of the game, I suppose. I mean, I wish Biden was able to enact some student debt relief. That would have certainly helped me out. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, I was kind of, I mean, I recall being mad at the Supreme Court and the district courts that initially blocked him back during his presidency. So I think I've been fairly consistent in this regard that I do think these lower level judges have too much power. If the Supreme Court wants to overrule something the president does, on one hand, like I would like to make a shift towards autocracy. On the other hand, I can live with that because to me that seems like equality. If this, I feel like if the Supreme Court can overrule the president, that's fine. But it doesn't. It seems like tyranny when a federal court judge, like a low level one, can overrule a president. That just doesn't seem right
Right,
to me at all.
and especially like you got to think most of these federal court judges, even these lower level ones, they may have been nominated 20 fucking years ago, right? They're not at all, like when you're selecting a judge, you're somewhat the current selections are somewhat in tune with the current political agenda. So for example, like the judges that Trump nominates this year are going to be consistent with the Trump agenda, right? But whenever you go
Oh
back
yeah.
to a guy 20 years ago, at this point you're almost let's say a little bit over 20 years ago, so that way I can go to like Clinton, right? The politics and the political philosophy of the Clinton administration is nowhere even comparable with the politics of today, right? So I do see what you're saying, how it seems literally like tyranny, even though it's a check, right? Um, and I'm not saying that there's not soundness in your argument, but I would just say that generally I'm okay with because the, I mean, I don't know, it gridlocks progress whenever you allow these nationwide injunctions, but it also does seem to help us out a little bit so that way no one does crazy shit. So there might be a happy medium. Maybe they can just pause, but like you had these district judges, Darren, that were literally like, no, 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 no. You have to go back. You have to undeport these illegal immigrants. You have to undeport them, bring them back, give them due process, and then you can deport them. And I'm like, how does a district judge have that level of authority? That seems nuts.
Well, and it seems like their power isn't even being erased necessarily. It's just the threshold is higher. So, uh, I guess the scope has been narrowed. So, where these nationwide injunctions imposed by judges only apply to states,
Yeah, but
groups like class action lawsuits, and then individuals that sued. So it's not like their power has been totally stripped. It's just they don't have this far-reaching, overbearing power almost
right, because I
anymore.
mean, there for a while, and not just in this instance, I would argue that for the student loan relief, right, and everything, DACA, right. It almost seemed like every single district court judge could pretend to basically pause an executive order or pause. He would have as much power as the Supreme Court for essentially a year and a half while the Supreme Court takes its time reading on what they're going to do. And that's how is that democracy? Someone explain that to me. And God, that's gonna get some hate on left wing Twitter. But it's I just feel like that's so obvious to everyone that a district judge should not have as much power as the president of the United States. Are you out of your mind?
Oh yeah, yeah. I see both sides because I mean, there's give and take. Obviously, if we, I mean, with Trump, it is dangerous, I guess, because he's so off his rocker at times. But on the other hand, once a more sane person gets in the office, I don't want them to be, bogged down by all this. So,
Well,
uh,
the
I,
to steel man it, right? I mean, like we both agree, there is no reading out the birthright citizenship, right? There's no. So let me just do a complete hypothetical for you here. Let's say, you know, a Democratic president gets in and he passes an executive order that bans private gun sales, right? I mean, that's clearly unconstitutional, right? I mean, that violates probably 1,000 laws in the United States regarding
mhm.
commerce and the rights of gun owners and stuff, right? Um, Essentially, without nationwide injunctions, you'd have a scenario where blue states get to have like a ban on firearm sales, and red states get to keep it until the Supreme Court decides to weigh in, if they decide to weigh in. And how is that fair, right? You're almost going to have 50 different states and not one United States.
Oh yeah. I mean, on one hand, I guess it's kind of the way you laid that out. You could kind of see a timeline in which there's almost like a shift towards confederacy rather than like the more union type model, federalist type model. Confederacy being just like a bunch of states, but the laws are more patchwork,
Right. So typically in a confederacy, the rights of the state will trump the rights of the federal. So if Texas says we want to keep private gun sales and the Fed says private gun sales are illegal, then the deference has to go to the state of Texas. Just as an example.
Oh yeah, and
And
ultimately,
that
I
clearly
don't
is
think
bad,
that's.
right? I mean, we tried that before. That's bad. And I don't think this is moving us in that direction completely, but it's definitely like that direction, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't think that that is workable at all. So, in that sense, I don't want to. I don't want us to move in that direction. Ultimately, I hope that this gets seized upon and it moves us almost in a more united direction, one in which the executive can just enact his agenda more efficiently. But I do see your point, and history played out the way it did for a reason. I mean, we only operated under the Articles of Confederation for like okay, my history. It's been a while. Like I want to say a few decades, right? Or was it even less than
Oh, no,
that?
I don't even know if we didn't even make it a decade. I don't know if we made
We,
it 3. I don't even know if we made it 5 years.
you know what? That sounds right. That maybe I'm turning 3 years into 3 decades.
8
I
years is
hate to
what Google says.
8 years.
8
Okay,
years.
okay. So I overestimate it. So it didn't even last that long. So
Yeah, that
I
was
mean,
our first form of American government actually, folks.
I agree with the executive order, but I do see the other side. And but you kind of take a bit of the opposite approach, but you do see the argument.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have, if anything, I would have just heightened the court that had this power. I would have heightened it to the Circuit Court of Appeals. But I wouldn't have I wouldn't have taken it away. I don't know. I just would have been a little bit more consistent. Like either they do have the power or they don't. Either, so like this whole state by state thing, I think is only going to breed more chaos. And but that is what we're doing. So that'll be interesting. So for our viewers who have been watching for a little bit, we've talked about this budget bill I think twice already at least. So I'm not going to go super in depth into the specifics, but I just want to say that it right now it has passed the first stage in the Senate, which basically means that the senators have agreed to accept the House version of the bill, and now they are working on revisions. So, in other words, the House version of the bill has passed the Senate parliamentarian, and now they are working on the amendments that they will then vote on and then send back to the House if it passes reconciliation. But the Senate has key rules, and I'm very sorry for those of you who are aware of these rules, but this is very important when you're talking about reconciliation. So the Senate parliamentarian is basically an advisory to the rules of the Senate. Okay? It's just a referee for the Senate rules. That's all it is. It's a nonpartisan position within the government, and all it does is advise. That's all it does. And whenever you go through reconciliation, there's this rule known as the Byrd Rule. It's way back in like 1989 or something. Basically, it says, listen, if you're going to go through reconciliation to avoid the 60 vote hurdle to get over the filibuster, then what you have to do is it's got like six rules that you have to follow. The three big ones that are always there is, policy changes cannot be in the bill. It can only deal with funding. And we'll talk about that later, but that's one of them. The bill cannot increase the deficit after a 10-year period. And we'll get into this later as well, but there's some ways around that as we will see. And then, of course, no changes to Social Security whatsoever. So funding for Social Security remains unchanged. At the end of the day, though, the parliamentarian is not who decides, what violates the Byrd Rule and what does not. Ultimately, it's the vice president, which is in this case J.D. Vance. So, um, we'll go over that all later, but that's just big stuff. But to finally pass, we're going to need 50 votes in the Senate, which means the Republicans can only lose 4 votes. Right now, they're already at 2. And Darren, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you. Um, what concerns you about this bill specifically, like the contents of this bill? And then what do you think about some of the stuff that has been kicked out by the parliamentarian?
Uh, well, I my biggest concern, honestly, is the tax cut extensions. That seems to be the biggest cost associated with the bill. I mean, we're at a time we've just accumulated so much debt. I mean, as much as in the short term, it'll probably feel good for me. I don't know how much even it'll affect me. I mean, I haven't looked at the marginal rates, but I did see that for middle income households, which is what I would describe myself as, the savings are really only estimated to it'll net out like at like 1,000 a year. And that's on the upside. So yeah, that I mean, it just worries me that we're lowering taxes. Now is not the time for it. But written down, I think when you net it out, this is going to add around like 4 trillion to the debt, and now they've projected that out over 10 years. So I mean, it's not good. I guess if I had something to positive to say, I'm glad for the border and immigration enforcement funding. That seems to be like the one good part. There's some other like little things that are kind of nice, like they're gonna give like $1,000 to any baby born between like 2024 and 2028, so or something. So and that'll accrue like interest or whatever. So I mean, there's some nice little things that aren't going to cost way too much, but ultimately, it seems just like a bad bill. Because of the tax cuts, the Medicaid cut slash enforcement. I'm okay with the enforcement stuff on the Medicaid. I think that, I mean, there's nothing I can really criticize with that, but the cuts, however, I think that's generally bad. But
Yeah, I mean, overall, listen, not a good bill. not a good bill. I mean, under the rosiest assumptions, the best case scenario is this is going to add 3.3 trillion over the next 10 years. The worst case scenario is this could, listen, don't take my word for it. Take, Republican Rand Paul's word for it.
This bill votes and this debt ceiling goes through, the debt is owned by the GOP, and there is no more campaigning and saying this is the Democrats. It will be owned by the Republicans, and I think that's a huge mistake.
I mean, this sucker is going to add over $5 trillion potentially over the next 10 years. And now don't worry. And here's the thing, it's all front loaded, right? So we're not even going to make it to the 10-year mark, right? They wouldn't be raising the debt ceiling if it wasn't if it wasn't going to add to the debt, right? And listen, I for the audience, I'm not against, deficit spending. I'm not against running up the money, but here's my thing is that you're going to have to give me something for it. And I mean something like tangible. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act, right? I'm a huge supporter of that. Things like, chip manufacturing subsidies, infrastructure, green energy, all of that. All of that shit sounds nice, right? Especially for sun or solar and wind, right? That's huge. I'm all for that. But this idea that we're basically going to cut taxes. I mean, like you said, those tax cuts, that's the chunk of the bill. I mean, that's just in the tax cut extensions alone, we're going to lose money on what we're saving between Medicaid, what they're cutting out of green energy, what they're cutting out of student loans, what they're cutting out of SNAP. But listen, if you're telling me, listen, Wyatt, you're going to get a tax cut out of this, and you need to be happy about that, I'm going to be like, listen, dude, we're, we're going bankrupt, number one. We're cutting from Medicaid, the most vulnerable people in society. And I understand what you're saying about the enforcement and the eligibility checks. But here's the thing, Darren, every single time they do those, you want to know the funny thing? The enforcement policy cost more than what it costs to put the people on Medicaid. So it's a more expensive version of what you're trying to save. Isn't that interesting? But
That yeah, that I mean, you're probably right, honestly, because thinking about it, I mean, while I do imagine, like, I assume there is some fraud and abuse. I imagine it's pretty limited, and then you got to think you're going to be paying like however many salaries for these federal employees to go track people down and see if they're actually eligible or not. So ultimately, I don't see it saving a lot of money, and
right. I mean, in the private industry, they call this shrinkage. It's just the amount of waste or theft or whatever, abuse, somebody's cheating the system, right? I mean, it's cheaper and better for your business, just like it is for the government right now. It's better to just not even enforce it because it's going to cost 2 to 3 times what it is to just pay the people,
yeah, yeah,
Um,
and another thing. Now I'm getting my information pretty much solely from the New York Times, and I do
Lib.
trust them. But I'm wondering. Okay, so here's an item, and I'll get this. The caveat is that the Senate parliamentarian determined that this specific provision I'm about to list does not comply with the chamber's rules, and it may be removed or modified. But they have the removal of gender transition care from Medicaid, giving us a savings of 2.6 billion. I just don't see how that's possible. There's not enough transgender people on Medicaid trying to
Right, right.
like so these numbers are obviously and the New York Times is probably just reporting what they have access to, but there's no way you can get 2.6 billion in savings from like cutting out the trans people on Medicaid. Like I can't I don't even think it would be 0.1 billion if I'm being honest. I
Well,
don't
and
see
and
how.
and it also specifies, does it not, minors, right? Or does it just specify adults?
Oh, it's minors and adults. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. Well, still, there's no way. And well, and just to like clarify, because we're both going off of that New York Times articles, that's like the line item of the bill. So in other words, the Republicans are claiming that somewhere in the Biden administration or the previous budget reconciliation package that there was a gender transition care like line item, and they're just trying to remove that. But yeah, I agree. There's not a prayer that, and plus, gender affirming care that includes makeup. You know what I mean? Like that include like or Ozempic or like gender affirming care doesn't just go to transgenders, right? Like if you dye your hair or get extensions, that's gender affirming care. So I would it doesn't apply to just transgender stuff. So whenever I guess what I'm saying is that whenever you expand the definition of gender affirming care, it's not really most of the time it's not even referring to transgenders.
Yeah, I could definitely see a lot of it being like, do you remember those commercials that used to play about like gynecomastia?
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so I mean, when a young boy develops tits because of some medication that had a bad side effect, obviously you need to, chop those off. So, that's also affirming care. But even if you included them in that number, like with like trans people, I just don't see how you could ever get that many billion. Uh, I don't see how you could get 2.6 billion out of that. That's just obviously a made up number on its face, and that's one of many because I was looking through the list. And I just feel like these numbers would fall apart under even the most basic of scrutiny. Uh, yeah, I just don't see how we're saving this many billions. And so when you take that into account, where ultimately over 10 years, like the total savings is only like a trillion. But when you take the grain of salt that like half of it might just be BS, then I don't even know if we're getting half a trillion in savings. So if you net it out, it might. I mean, it might be close. I'm sure it's like five trillion in total cost over the 10 years, probably minimum, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, like there's some stuff that you can look at this bill and say like, oh, well, hey, at least we're getting this, you know, like most people they would point to the tax cut or that child tax, like that child bank account thing that you were talking about, or they'll talk about the fact that the military budget is going up or the border. But does that really? I mean, and just a sincere question to the audience: does that even come close to the fact that we might go $5 trillion in debt, right? Does that even is that even are we on the same planet if that's what it, and plus we're getting rid of all the really good stuff. I mean, Darren, I don't know what your opinions are on like the green energy and Medicaid and like SNAP, but like SNAP is getting cut almost in half. Like it's unbelievable. Um, and the national parks and the natural resources that are their protections are being withdrawn. I just don't look at how anyone can look at this bill and go, yeah. I mean, strictly outside of a partisan context, I don't know how anyone could support this. This is just bullshit, to be quite honest with you. Um,
It's pretty bad, especially I will say the green stuff. I mean that's a growing industry, and honestly, I mean to get rid of, uh, I mean to do the
we should be
cuts they're doing.
fueling it. We should be fueling it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
No pun intended. Um, but yeah, that when I hear green energy, you should be thinking jobs, dude. You should be thinking jobs and growth. That's what you should be thinking.
Oh yeah, it's made a lot of jobs in this state. I mean, think of all the windmill technicians, and there are and they pay well too. I mean, that's not a bad job. Their salary is close to mine, so and I'm an accountant, so I mean
Yeah,
it's a great jobs program, and and I will say there was a specific provision in the bill that seems like it's not going to make it through, but it was talked about in the weeks prior. Not by us, but I had seen it talked about where they were thinking of selling off federal land. I saw something on here that that's unlikely to pass. So
I think it's already gotten
thank
pulled.
goodness.
I think it's already gotten pulled. So
Okay, thank goodness. Yeah, because I'm not seeing it again, so I'm thinking New York Times has updated the page and struck it from the yeah, because
I
it
got you.
was under the environment and green section. So
Yeah. Oh, it's actually if you scroll down, it's under natural resources towards the. It's still on mine. But anyway. Um, I do have another follow-up question for you. So obviously, we're both in somewhat agreement that this bill is bad in some way, right? We may disagree on what that means and what that looks like, but we both agree this is bad generally. Do you think
oh yeah.
that the Senate is gonna get the four defectors that it needs in order to stop this bill in the current form from passing? So right now they already have Rand Paul as a for sure and Tom Tillis as a for sure. They are not voting in support of this fucking thing. So they only need two more. So what do you think their chances are?
uh I think honestly their chances are pretty slim of getting the defectors. I think it'll probably pass. I think there's going to be some heavy amendments to it. I mean, it's going to get cut up for sure, but uh yeah, I think it'll pass. Uh, I I mean I could see maybe some I could see maybe some border and immigration enforcement getting on the chopping block. I could see some other things getting the chopping block, but uh, I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, I think the
I
biggest the
think
biggest stickler I think is going to be the Medicaid cuts, right? Don't you? Like I don't nobody's going to be a stickler in the Republican Party over the border security getting improved, right? Like that's if anything, I would say that the border security stuff is the most reliable thing to stay in that bill.
I'm of two minds. Uh, I think at first glance, you would think the border stuff would stay in, and it would play well, I'm sure, with the base for all these senators, but also the big ag lobbies a lot of these senators, and a lot of their workforce comes from the illegal population, so there are competing interests. I could see it getting sliced up a bit. uh yeah, the Medicaid stuff. I think a lot of the Medicaid cuts are probably going to have to be whittled down somewhere. And also the SNAP stuff, food stamps.
Right.
Uh, because uh, I'm also, I mean, on one hand, like a lot of these SNAP recipients are not starving, like to be honest, but it's not going to play well. If anybody cuts it. So, there's not a lot of incentive, I think, to make these uh, cuts that really don't amount to all that much. Uh, it's just going to play bad for the senators. So I could see some of these cuts getting whittled down. I don't think the senators want to go back to their state and advertise that they voted to cut it that much. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, well, so much so that Lisa Murkowski, right, the senator from Alaska. She's actually already got it. We don't know if the parliamentarian's going to let them do it or not, but there's like a special carve out in these Medicaid cuts for Alaska and Hawaii. So we'll see if that stays. But if it doesn't stay, then she's almost certainly a no. So they might have their three, but I don't know if getting a fourth, you may as well be asking for the world, dude. I mean, the idea that, and here's the thing though, I think the more interesting question, Darren, is when let's say it passes the Senate, right? And it goes over to
Mm.
the House. I mean, what's their majority in the House? It's only like 3 seats, right? 4 seats?
It's pretty low as well.
So do you think the Freedom Caucus could stop this?
I mean,
Or do you think they fall in line? I think that the Republicans the Freedom Caucus specifically, will cry bloody murder, and then they will ultimately fall right in line.
yeah, I mean, that's basically my that's kind of my estimation of them as well. I think there are a lot of big talk. I think maybe Thomas Massey will be more principled. He's really caught the ire of Trump lately, so maybe there's even a personal level in which he'll, be less compliant, So, but beyond him, I mean, what other Republican can you name that won't go along with it?
Well, they need eight. They need eight total to stop it in the House.
Yeah, I
Out of
think it'll.
220, though, you don't. I still don't think so. I'll be honest. I think they fall in line like pretty quick, honestly.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think they understand it. It would be bad for them as bad as it might be to advertise to their voters, their constituents that they voted for it. It would be worse to be on blast on Truth Social for the next 18 months, so or longer, so I think the calculation they'll make is that it would be better for them to just pass the bill. So I think the majority will fall. I think it'll pass the House if it once it goes back there for the second round.
Yeah, and honestly, like pragmatism is going to hit pretty. Like the Freedom Caucus understands that, if they amend this bill and they filibuster for as long as they can, um, the odds of it going, through an amendment process again in the House and then back to the Senate, and then whew, that's that's not going to happen. And here's the thing: the Senate can only do budget reconciliation 3 times a year. They're already doing two of them here, one for the budget reconciliation and one to raise the debt ceiling. So if this fails here, then something's got to give whenever it comes back. Which I think they'll see that and they'll be like, okay, we just kind of have to fall in line. And it's not just them, by the way. Like Democrats did this for Biden too. It's pretty. It's just kind of standard protocol that the Senate gets their way. I mean, we may all hate that, but that's just kind of the way it is.
I think it'll easily pass once the Senate sends it back. I don't think there'll be, and they've also set a deadline for themselves at what, July 4th.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
Trump's deadline. Yeah.
yeah, I think by July 4th or before then, it'll probably pass. I don't think it's really at much risk of not getting through before then. So, people scoffed at that idea, but I mean, I think it'll pass. I mean, but what do you think? Do you think it passes by July 4th or not?
July 4th would be a tall ask, just because they're just now starting the amendments process in the Senate, which so that means it would have to go through amendments process. We're recording obviously on a Monday, folks. So that would means that it would have to go through all of the amendment stuff before Wednesday, and then it would have to go to the House for a vote on the floor by Friday to get on Trump's desk by Friday night. So it's a tall ask, but it is possible. So now let me be clear. This because there's some people on the left that are getting a little hopeful that this budget bill is going to die. I have news for you. They're going to pass a budget reconciliation bill. Whether or not there's some tweaks in this current form, that's really the question. The idea that this is going to die and Trump's not going to pass a budget bill, that's not going to happen. All right. It's just whether or not they pass it now or they pass it in the middle of July with some minor tweaks. All right. That's what's going to happen.
Oh yeah, I have no belief that it won't pass eventually. I mean, I do understand July 4th is a bit of a tall order, but also I think I think Trump is going to get what he wants ultimately. I think his ability to make people fall in line is strong enough that
Yep.
I think it'll pass pretty quick. And I don't think it's going to be whittled down all too much. I think it's going to certainly be whittled down, but nobody wants to go against him, so
Yeah.
I don't think anyone has the balls.
Now, really quick before we get off of this bill here and we head out, Elon Musk is having a fucking shitstorm. All right, tweeting about this bill, and he says that if it's the last thing he ever does, he's gonna primary every son of a gun who supported this bill. Right? That's what he said on Twitter. Um, I'm just curious on your thoughts about this. So just two-part question here is one, how do you think that the people of America will respond to this in the midterms? And then two, how do you think the donors, such as Elon Musk, will respond to this bill? He said he claims he's going to start his own third party. We'll see how that goes, but I just want to get your take on how you think this shakes out.
Well, okay. I think the chances that Elon creates a viable third party are about as likely as him bringing us to Mars in the next decade. So pretty low, basically zero. Uh, yeah, I don't. Ultimately, I would like to say that that this bill will not play well with the base, and maybe it won't. But I don't think Trump will catch any of the blame for it. Ultimately, I think somehow someone else will be blamed. Who knows who, but it won't be Trump. So for the Congress people voting for it, I think this will be ultimately a bad thing for them. But I don't think anything bad will come to Trump as a result of it. He's just Teflon Don, So, but in your case, what do you think? Do you think Elon is serious about all that, or is he just kind of having a fit and in a
He's having
few
a
days?
fit. He's having a fit. The and it come November next year, he will be funding. He will very quickly realize one of two things: either A, he can't start his own party, right, which is just a fact. I mean, a third party is a pipe dream, and then he will then conclude that any like reform has to be done in his case within the Republican Party, right? So similar to like the socialism movement here in America, they didn't start their own party, right? They are now, well, they're not anymore, right? They are now infiltrating, you could say, the Democratic Party and becoming a coalition within there, right? Similar to what the libertarians did within the Republican Party now. Like, think Thomas Massey. He's not a conservative. He's a libertarian, you know?
Oh yeah.
And Elon will do the same thing. He will have a form of I don't even know what you'd call it, techno fascism, like within the Republican Party. These libertarian, anarcho capitalists. But yeah,
Oh
that's
yeah.
that's what I think. And I agree with you. Trump will face no consequences for this. Yeah, it would have to be a hell of a deal for the Democrats to even just win a majority in the Senate. But the idea that they're going to have enough to impeach him, yeah, no. And that's the only real political consequence, right? I mean, he can take the shit all day, but the idea that they're going to have enough to votes to impeach him, I mean, let's get real,